Welcome back. Plumes of smoke rose over various locations in Khartoum as fighting continued in the Sudanese capital. Envoys from Sudan's warring parties were in Saudi Arabia for talks that international mediators hope will bring an end to the conflict. The U.S.-Saudi initiative is the first series attempt to end the fighting that has turned parts of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, into war zones and derailed an internationally backed plan to usher in civilian rule following years of unrest and uprisings. Sudan's health ministry said at least 551 people have been killed and more than 5,000 injured since the fighting began. Meanwhile, the Arab League held an emergency meeting in Cairo over the weekend, the third of its kind in 3 weeks, to discuss the ongoing military clashes in Sudan. Sudan has been suffering deadly armed clashes between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces in the capital city of Khartoum and other areas since April 15th, with the two sides accusing each other of initiating the conflict. Shortly after the outbreak of the conflict, the Arab League held two emergency meetings on April 16th and April 30th, respectively, to discuss the situation in Sudan. Top diplomats in the Arab world gathered in the Egyptian capital once again, trying to see how they can cooperate to help the Sudanese talks succeed so as to ensure Sudan is not dragged into a long-armed conflict.
Top priority of the Arab League now is to find a real solution and to stop the bloodshed, to protect the livelihood of people in Sudan, especially that this country is relying on the humanitarian aid. The consequences have exacerbated. It's not about to call like the RSF a militia or not. The top priority now for the Arab League is to find a way out of the current situation.
In the meantime, Kenyan President William Ruto called for the immediate cessation of hostilities in Sudan, where fighting continues to rage in Khartoum. Following a meeting in Nairobi with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Mr. Ruto said the two discussed the conflict and its spillover effects in the region.
We also had an opportunity to discuss regional peace and security and shared our concerns regarding the unfortunate events in Sudan and their spillover effects to the region. We agreed on the immediate need for unconditional cessation of hostilities and humanitarian aid access and protection of civilians. We underscored the need for the international community to support Kenya, IGAD, and the African Union in the ongoing efforts to resolve that conflict. I urged Chancellor Scholz to use his voice and Germany's influence in various platforms, including the EU, the G7, G20, and the UN, to focus global attention on the forgotten conflicts in Africa in general, and especially in the Horn of Africa.
His Excellency and the Chancellor will now retreat and proceed for lunch. Kindly remain seated as they retreat, and we'll guide you on how to go from here.
Shortly after fighting erupted in Sudan, thousands of people streamed into northern South Sudan to escape the conflict. United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has registered more than 30,000 people crossing into South Sudan, more than 90% of them South Sudanese. However, it says the true number is likely much higher.
Since the conflict broke out, we have registered over 25,000 people who have crossed, but the numbers are likely much higher because we cannot register everyone, and many people are also crossing via informal border points. South Sudan is one of UNHCR's most underfunded crises already, and we are now mobilizing to support this new influx of individuals. So we're of course very concerned about that. This humanitarian situation, as I said, is severely underfunded already, and we urge the international community to not forget about South Sudan.
Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths is calling for clear, definitive agreements and commitments in writing to protect the movement of humanitarian supplies and humanitarian workers, as well as to stop the looting in Sudan. Mr. Griffiths traveled to Sudan to reaffirm the UN's commitment to the Sudanese people, meet with members of the humanitarian community, and seek commitment from the parties to protect humanitarian assets.
I'm here in Port Sudan. I came here today to demonstrate by this visit the solidarity that the United Nations holds very dearly with the people of Sudan, especially in these extraordinarily difficult times. My responsibility is with regard to the humanitarian operation. And so today, I've had meetings and discussions with the heads of humanitarian agencies in the UN system, with international NGOs, and perhaps more importantly and most importantly, with the representatives of Sudanese NGOs and Sudanese civil society. And the reason I wanted to meet them was to understand from them what do they need from others to allow them to do the job they do best, which is providing support and assistance for the protection of the Sudanese people. And there are two things they all said to me are necessary.
A United Arab Emirates plane carrying tons of urgent medical supplies has landed in Port Sudan. The aircraft, which was sent in coordination with the World Health Organization, is one of the first to be sent to Sudan with medical supplies by the United Nations since the conflict began. Officials on the ground say the next challenge will be ensuring the aid reaches the right people.
I mean, the most difficult challenge for us now is we already have these supplies at Port Sudan. Now the challenge is how to get these supplies to where they are needed, at the health facilities to save lives of the injured patients. And that's what we are doing actually. Some of the states we can reach without much challenges, but others it's very challenging. And we are exploring all the actors on the ground, Red Crescent and others, NGOs, volunteers, to reach to those. In addition, of course, with the Ministry of Health, federal and state ministries of health, to reach the health facilities that they can reach. We need to do at the same time, both at higher level, from the highest possible level, put pressure on the fighting parties, but the most important to me now operationally is to do with the local, at the local level, to really get access.
Meanwhile, 5 planes carrying aid have been dispatched from Kuwait, Qatar, and the International Committee of the Red Cross to Port Sudan. Sudanese Health Ministry Representative Al-Fateh Rabi' Abdullah said 4 of the aircrafts landed at Port Sudan International Airport loaded with food and medical supplies. The aid comes with a worsening humanitarian situation in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, after more than 2 weeks of fighting between Sudanese armed forces and paramilitary rapid support forces. Security expert David Otto joins me now for more. Welcome, David. It seems as though this bad blood going on in Sudan appears not to be ending anytime soon. What do you make of all of this that's been happening recently?
Well, you're right. The bad blood is still ongoing. Both generals of the Rapid Support Forces, General Delgado, and his hated counterpart, General Al-Burhan of the Sudanese Armed Forces, they are still at it. We still do not have a sense of where this is going to end. We know that there has been a U.S. and a Saudi Arabia-backed agreement to have some negotiations, but of course, both sides have made it very clear that negotiations would only be limited to humanitarian passage. You know, that the need to negotiate for an end to the conflict is no longer, it's not on the table as we speak. So the situation is quite dire because, of course, we're not just talking about the devastating nature of the humanitarian crisis, you know, people that have been evacuated away from Khartoum, relocated to other safe regions, people that have moved to neighboring states. We're talking about the potential for arms to be smuggled alongside the same routes that people who have been driven away from the conflict are taking. So it's quite a very disturbing situation, made worse, I have to add, by the fact that we have a lot of disjointed endeavors to resolve the crisis without any united front. So it's just creating a whole lot of confusion and chaos. And, of course, in the battlefield, the war still goes on.
And David, so far the leaders of both factions have shown little public willingness to really negotiate after more than 2 weeks of fighting. What can you speculate as the cause of this?
It's very simple. Both have an objective in terms of what they want to achieve. For example, the Rapid Support Forces, they seem to be much more on the offensive. They have been, taking over places like the presidential palace. Mindful, there is a lot of disinformation and propaganda which is being pushed out there. So it's very difficult to verify this information. But the Rapid Support Forces, seem to be, making sure that they push back the Sudanese armed forces of General Al-Burhan. While on the other side, the Sudanese armed forces, who have a very powerful aerial cover, using airplanes, or military jets to fight, they are on the defensive position because they want to make sure that they hold this critical infrastructure. Now, as long as none of the sides, has leverage in terms of, what I call the power infrastructures that they hold, this war is going to continue. But, I think that the big issue here is how do we come to a point where we can reconcile both, actors to come back to, perhaps the time when they did collaborate in 2019 to then, remove the former dictator al-Bashir. But that is not happening because they are both, at each other's neck, in terms of, how they want to see that the other leaves. So it's a very, very dicey situation. But as we speak, it's not looking like we would have any solution. It's not looking like we would have any end game because both sides are struggling to, consolidate power. It has to be reminded that, both sides are not recognized by the international community or the Sudanese. We're looking forward to a democratic process. So it's a bit of a chaotic situation as we speak.
Just last week, U.S. President Joe Biden issued an executive order permitting sanctions against Sudan with the aim of bringing an end to the fighting. What do you make of the West and other countries' role in ensuring that really this crisis is resolved?
Sanctions could be effective, but I don't think it's the solution now because what you don't want is to see Sudanese suffer as a result of these sanctions. Remember that, in 2019, when Al-Burhan, collaborated with General Hemeti to overthrow the then dictator, everyone was quite, pleased with them. The West, has cozied with this party since then. Now, the problem has now become, because, now that they've taken away the power, they want to keep it themselves, and Sudan has always been one of those countries that, since its independence in 1956, has seen a very limited amount of democracy. It has been ruled much more some level of dictatorship, theocracy, and some very limited period of democracy. So it's a very challenging country, and even if these sanctions are given to these leaders against them or against individuals who are found to have committed all sorts of atrocities, including war crimes. I don't think, this is where the solution now lies. I think the most important expectation is that we should have a united front. The African Union perhaps, should be leading any solutions and ensure that, both leaders can be brought together, reconciled, and let Sudan go back to a democratic process. This is what Sudanese want. They want to return to democracy and they want to have Khartoum back.
And my final question to you, David, is, in your opinion, can an idea of a peace formula be effective to really broker a peace between the warring parties?
I think there is a simple peace formula here. You've got to go back to the point of agreement where these two leaders, did agree before. You've got to look at, where the differences are. And it's been very clear that, the issue has been power sharing. So if, for example, the Rapid Support Forces are integrated into the Sudanese armed forces, this is not going to be an issue because, of course, the Rapid Support Forces were integrated as a security agency in 2013 under al-Bashir. Now, the trouble has been that, in line with the 2020 Juba agreement, some of the rebel groups, that do exist, for example, in Darfur, have now joined the ranks of the Rapid Support Forces, making it very powerful in such a way that the Sudanese army does believe that by integrating the rapid support forces into the army, they would overwhelm most of the powerful positions. And this is where the biggest problem is. But again, if there is an agreement in terms of the power sharing formula, the reintegration of these forces into the army, that could be potentially what people want. But again, let's go back to a return to democracy, because right now, none of the warring factions, has the legitimacy to be in power. So it's a matter of time. But let's see what all these negotiations and processes of talks yield in the next 1 week or two. My biggest fear is that this is going to drag on for another month or two, and then the impact to the region is going to be dire.
All right, David Otto, thank you so very much for joining us on today's program. Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
When we return, we'll take you on a journey to Italy, where the annual Light and Water Festival is currently underway. Stay with us. Welcome back. Away from Sudan, police say a gunman shot and killed 8 people and wounded at least 7 others at a busy mall north of Dallas. The city's police chief, Brian Harvey, said at a press conference the gunman, whom authorities said they think acted alone and whose motive was not yet known, was killed by a police officer after he began firing outside of the Allen Premium Outlet Mall in Allen, Texas. Medical City Healthcare, which runs 16 hospitals in the area, said in a statement that its trauma centers were treating 8 of the wounded victims who ranged in age from 5 to 61.
When we received the call, we activated our active attack integrated response. Our rescue task force teams found 7 deceased individuals on scene. We transported 9 individuals to the hospital to area trauma facilities. Of those that we transported, 2 have since died, 3 are in critical surgery, and 4 are stable.
At 3:36, our officer was at Allen Premium Outlets on an unrelated call. He heard gunshots, located the gunshot, located the shooter, neutralized the shooter, neutralized the threat. We believe at this point that the shooter acted alone. This is an ongoing active investigation. We've had tremendous local, county, and state and federal support, and we appreciate that.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden called on Congress to pass gun control bills for following the Texas mall shooting. The Democratic president renewed calls for Congress to ban assault weapons as well as to enact universal background checks and end immunity for gun manufacturers. However, there is little chance the narrowly divided House and Senate would pass such legislation, although polls show most Americans support background checks.
The action we take today is a step designed to make our nation the kind of nation we should be. It's about the most fundamental of things, the lives of our children, of our loved ones. We face literally a moral choice in this country, moral choice with profound real-world implications. Will we take wise steps to fulfill the responsibility to protect the innocent and while keeping faith with the constitutional rights? Will we match thoughts and prayers with action? I say yes, and that's what we're doing here today. Today's many things is proof that despite the naysayers, we can make meaningful progress on dealing with gun violence. Because make no mistake, sit down, you'll hear what I have to say. If you think you...
I've been trying to tell you this for years.
Let me finish my comment. Let him talk. No one, okay? Because make no mistake about it, this legislation is real progress, but more has to be done. The provision of this new legislation is going to save lives, and as proof that today's politics, we can come together on a bipartisan basis to get important things done.
Elsewhere, wildfires in Alberta, Canada, forced nearly 30,000 people to be evacuated by the end of the weekend. Authorities declared a provincial state of emergency as 108 active wildfires rage across the region. Alberta Wildfire Information Manager Christy Tucker said the total area of the province burned this year has now passed 375,000 hectares, adding that no Albertans or firefighters have been severely injured.
At the moment, there are 108 wildfires burning in Alberta. 31 of those are out of control. And in the last 24 hours, we noted 16 new wildfire starts. The total area of the province burned this year has now passed 375,000 hectares. I'm very happy to say, as far as I know, no Albertans, including firefighters, have been severely injured in this firefighting effort.
More than 29,000 individuals have been evacuated from their homes to safe locations, while other communities are on evacuation alert, and residents in those communities should be prepared to evacuate on short notice.
To bilateral relations now, Pakistan and Afghanistan's Taliban government have agreed to boost trade and lower tensions along their border amid a surge in attacks on Pakistani security forces. Pakistani Foreign Minister Bhutto Zardari and Afghanistan's Taliban-appointed Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi struck the deal over the weekend in Islamabad. The agreement is designed to improve bilateral trade, combat, and boost bilateral ties. Pakistani Foreign Ministry said in a statement that both parties held a candid and in-depth exchange on key issues of mutual concerns, including peace and security, as well as trade and connectivity. It adds that the two sides reaffirmed their desire to pursue continuous and practical engagement. And finally on the program, we're now in Italy, where the 5th edition of the Brixen Waterlight Festival is currently underway, with 47 big light installations about the environment and peace on display. It features works by artists from around the world. The festival runs until the 21st of May. Take a look.
Dozens of dazzling light installations have mesmerized visitors during the annual Waterlight Festival in South Tyrol town of Brixen. This year's themes of the exhibition, now in its 5th year, and which includes some 50 light artworks centered around peace and the environment.
I really like it. I love some installations. You can immerse on the nature and just enjoy the sound and the light produced by the different techniques that they use.
Brixen is located where two rivers meet, and it's where Danish artist Mads Vegas set up his work, Misty Mystery.
It's about aerial mystery, things happening in the sky that we don't really know what is, or maybe we do, but back in the day we didn't know what it was. So it's about, aurora borealis, the northern lights, and about maybe it's the gods doing something, the thunder, the lightning, things like that.
The war in Ukraine influenced Ukrainian artist Julia Shamshiva's endless rebirth, about how easily life can be disrupted.
My project is about an endless loop of life, that it's very fragile and we have to be responsible for our nature.
On the town's library wall, German art group Zenorama was commissioned to create strata, which refers to the layers formed over time through natural processes. Each layer of strata can provide information, as does the library.
Even if there are thousands of negative aspects we see right now, in our projection we also have this idea about a positive aspect, which we show because we are showing the whole thing as a loop. So everything which dissolves can grow again. And that's maybe the one aspect we want to point out, that we can still act and there's still hope.
With one of this year's themes being the environment, organizers said it was important to give artists a forum to express themselves.
And that's all for this edition of the World News Today. I'm Susan Ilian. See you tomorrow.